It has been quite a day for my next two guests. Crowdsource the Truth viewers are going to recognize Larry Klayman and Laura Loomer. Laura, you're running for Congress. Larry, you're a one-man Department of Justice. Can you guys tell us exactly what's happened today at the D.C. Appellate Court?
Let me just tee it up and then we'll turn it over to Laura. Is that we had filed a lawsuit a while back for both Freedom Watch and also for Laura, an antitrust lawsuit, and also a lawsuit under a District of Columbia law that prohibits political discrimination in speech. And we filed that in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, probably the most politicized court in the United States. It actually makes the Northern District of California look mild by comparison. A Trump-appointed judge, and this is something that I wrote about last week at WorldNet Daily. You can find it at freedomwatchusa.org. These judges were put in front of President Trump, and he just rubber-stamped their appointments. I don't think he knew who he was appointing. It was the lukewarm Federalist Society that put these names up, and people like Don McGahn, former White House counsel, who basically betrayed the president by going to speak for hours and hours with Robert Mueller and breaking through attorney-client privilege. So these are the kinds of people that recommended judges to President Trump. And lo and behold, we drew a Trump judge. And I figured, well, maybe that's good at the time. And his name is Trevor McFadden. But this guy's proven to be absolutely terrible, along with a bunch of other rhino Republican establishment Trump judges that he put on the bench. And he summarily dismissed the complaint without really any basis. He decided that he didn't think our antitrust claims were plausible. Well, that's not for him to decide. That's for a jury to decide. And they are plausible because what we have here were a number of social media companies who have discriminated not just against Laura, but against Freedom Watch, and in particular Google, YouTube, where our YouTubes have stayed static, for years and years and years. They don't go up. And, we're doing a lot of really important things that make a lot of news. And then, of course, Laura's been discriminated against. You all know the story. I'll let her tell it. But, she's been shut off of social media and, totally banned. So McFadden dismisses this, and then I take an appeal to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. Yesterday, President Trump issued a tweet which said that he was going to have his administration break up these social media companies. They're discriminating against conservatives. And before that, last week, the Department of Justice let it leak that they're preparing a civil complaint, antitrust complaint, against Google. Now, I'm a former antitrust lawyer. I know what I'm doing in this regard. I helped break up AT&T. This is a restraint of trade. These companies were acting in a parallel fashion to do things that even weren't in their economic interest because they're so leftist, they wanted to deny conservatives a voice on their platforms. Well, today, the D.C. Circuit, in a pathetic 4-page opinion that a first-year law student could have written in 1.5 hours at most, probably not even that, affirmed McFadden. And what was particularly outrageous is that we had the D.C. government come in on our behalf, on Freedom Watch's behalf and Laura's behalf, and say, we have an anti-discrimination law that says that political speech cannot be banned, cannot be discriminated against in a public forum. Now, this court looked for a way to dismiss the case, saying, well, this wasn't a public forum because that only exists if you're actually saying something, physically in a location in Washington, D.C., like Farragut Square, which everybody knows about, close where I used to have my office. So this is outrageous, and we are going to be going to the full court of all the judges and asking them to review it, and if necessary, the Supreme Court. But don't hold your breath in today's day and age, okay, because these judges are very politicized. Strong conservatives like yours truly and Laura Loomer, are generally not welcome in their court. They're rhino establishment Republicans, actually, and Democrats. 2 judges on this panel, Judge Randolph and Judge Rogers, were appointees of George Bush, the dad, and Jr., and another one of Clinton. And these people are the exact polar opposite of true conservatives. And that's what we're dealing with. So hopefully we'll get a fair hearing in front of all the 12 judges on that court. and also, if necessary, the Supreme Court. And I might add one other thing, and Laura will talk to this as well.
Yeah.
Because of the coronavirus, the court used that as an excuse to cancel oral argument. That's when you appear in front of the court and answer questions. That would have been very helpful to do that. But they don't even want to come out of their chambers. They don't want to confront anything. And I then went back and I said, look, even the Ninth Circuit, I have an argument on Friday for Klayman Bundy with regard to the appeal of his dismissal. By the way, the Trump Justice Department did that, if you can believe that. Our worthless Attorney General did that. And they're doing oral arguments by teleconference. Why can't you do it? So no sooner than 24 hours later, I got it denied. It denied the request. So there's something that's going on here. There's a lot of politics swirling around. It is true that these social media companies the judges don't like to take them on because they might allow for publication of bad stuff about them. And God knows with the power of these social media companies, how they exerted their pressure, perhaps even behind closed doors with these judges. And it was just simply an outrageous decision. And, I was talking to a reporter with a liberal publication. I won't reveal who he is. You can probably pick it up on the internet. And I said, what do you think of this thing? He says, well, it looks like they just wrote a memorandum. They could have written that, that's what I said, in a few hours. And it was probably a reaction to what Trump said yesterday. And so this is a leftist reporter that actually agreed with me on this. And it tells you the state of the judiciary today. Highly politicized, highly partisan, scared of their own shadow. And the Trump judges, are no different. They're almost as bad as the Obama and Clinton judges. They're absolutely terrible.
We're getting some noise there from your microphone. I know we had some sound problems in the beginning. Maybe, yeah, that seems to have helped it. Laura, can you hear us all right?
Yeah, somewhat. There's just a little bit of a ringing noise in the background.
Did what I said come through anyway, despite the
yes.
The background?
We heard it, and I want to be clear. This is not the end of the line. The case was not dismissed with prejudice or anything like that. They've just, what does the outcome here mean?
Well, the irony is that we could replead. I mean, their reasoning was so contrived. They said, well, you alleged parallel conduct, in other words, an agreement and restraint of trade, that you don't actually have the written agreement or the oral agreement in front of you. But it is a valid antitrust concept, particularly with price fixing, when two actors shift their prices identically at the same time or close to it. That's called parallel pricing. And that can give rise to a strong presumption of a restraint of trade under the Sherman Act, under Section 1. We also pled monopolization under Section 2, an attempt to monopolize the social media market. And so what they said was, well, you didn't have actual proof of the agreement. Well, that's what you get when you take discovery, when the case goes forward. So technically, I think I can probably even refile this. I'll look for another jurisdiction, frankly, because this is a very political jurisdiction. Maybe we'll do it in Florida where Laura lives. It's a much better jurisdiction. Maybe we'll do it in state court where the judges actually let cases go forward and they're answerable to the public at the voting box, as opposed to federal judges that think they're there for life and have immunity. And we'll see how that flies, because what they basically said is that if you can show that agreement, in this case, could go forward, and they played a game, because you can't show the actual agreement unless you have a chance to get into the files of Google, YouTube, Facebook, Apple, Instagram, and the rest. So it was a very, very dishonest decision, but nothing new coming out of the judiciary. It's something we've been dealing with. And frankly, it's why this country is, God forbid, and I'm trying to head it off, but it could be headed in the way of a violent revolution, because if you don't have judges that will protect you, what do you have? Let me say one other thing. Thomas Jefferson was the smartest, in my view, and most prescient of all our founding fathers. He was against the appointment of federal judges. He said they will turn into despots because they're unelected and they think they're there for life. In fact, the Constitution doesn't say they're there for life, but they will wildly spin out of control. And he said, and sometime down the line, we will have to spill the blood of patriots again. That's what he said.
I hope we can fall short of that, Larry, because, Laura is running for Congress, and I'm hopeful that she'll...
Wait a second here, let me finish.
Yeah.
I'm not advocating that. And Laura and I are not seeking to do that. But what I'm saying is when you have judges that freeze you out and will not protect your rights, then the masses, not Laura or me, may eventually rise up.
Of course. So, Laura, how do you feel about what's happened today?
Well, I'm not very happy about the news from this morning, especially given the fact that, as Larry mentioned, we were promised an oral argument, okay? And we have been waiting for 2 years since we filed this lawsuit. If you recall, this lawsuit was filed in 2018, and now it's 2020. And, litigation takes a very long time. And especially when it comes to these social media companies, okay, what they do is these social media companies, each of them will have 4 lawyers each show up, right? So whether it's Facebook, this is about Facebook, Twitter, Google, and Apple. And so they have unlimited amounts of money, unlimited amounts of resources to play these legal games, okay? And time really isn't of the essence for them. And then this litigation gets held up in court. And because of coronavirus, we weren't able to have our oral argument. And I really do believe that, this is a very compelling case. It's something that has now consumed the national narrative. You have the President of the United States talking about how his administration is going to be pursuing antitrust legislation or antitrust litigation. Earlier in the year, you had all 50 states attorneys generals, all 50, okay? Every single state in this country, the attorney generals. That's a bipartisan effort, okay, calling for antitrust investigations into these same companies. And Larry and I have really, been the pioneers with regard to big tech social media giants, okay? In 2018, when people were still calling this a right-wing conspiracy theory and saying that there was no such thing as censorship of conservatives, we filed the first antitrust case against these big tech giants. And so I find it to be rather suspicious that, after we were told that we were going to have an oral argument, and then we were told that, it had been postponed because of Corona, and then it could be over the telephone, and now, just canceled. I think the timing of this is very suspicious. And a lot of people, even leftist reporters today, were saying, interesting timing, how the same day that President Trump tweets that he's going to take serious action against Twitter and these other companies who, of course, we took the first step to sue. And then, as you mentioned, it was leaked out last week that Attorney General Barr was going to be pursuing an antitrust investigation as well. I don't believe in coincidences. And also, I'm not a lawyer, but given what Larry told me this morning about how the decision, it was just very brief, it was very sloppy, it didn't look like there was much effort put into it. And then there was this very passive aggressive remark from the judge. I'm sure Larry can elaborate on this too, that said that the claims made in the case weren't worthy of a response, as if this is not important enough for a response. And I don't understand how these judges, right? And it's concerning that this guy, what Trevor McFadden is his name, is a Trump appointed judge, right? Because you would assume that the Trump administration, as they have expressed their desire to get a hold of these big tech social media companies to prevent election interference and prevent the censorship of conservatives, that's the reason why presidents appoint judges, right? You appoint judges during your presidency so that, you can have judges who are actually going to uphold the Constitution and hopefully, rule in a way that is favorable to what your administration is promoting, right? I mean, it seems really counterintuitive that a Trump appointed judge would be ruling against something that even the president of the United States and his own administration is now proposing, because, people can mock me and Larry as much as they want. And I know that there's a lot of people on the left and the right who tried to say that our lawsuit was frivolous and that our lawsuit was stupid and that, we had no merit. But clearly that's not the case when you have people like Senator Ted Cruz, you have people like Marco Rubio, you have the Trump administration, Attorney General Barr, and as I just said, all 50 states attorneys generals replicating our legal argument, replicating our legal strategy of, pursuing an antitrust lawsuit or antitrust investigation into these companies. And so there really is a lot of bias. It's something that I've experienced, not just in this case with Larry, but in several of the other cases that he's representing me on as well, where you have these judges who happen to be, conservative appointed judges, oftentimes who they don't even want to deal with the controversy in their courtroom. And so they won't even allow for certain cases to proceed to discovery. And I know that this is the case in a defamation lawsuit against Facebook that Larry also filed for me. And so it's without making a broad statement about this case in particular, I would say that there's a lot of judicial corruption in our country, and it's going to be really hard to take action against these companies and to ensure the sanctity and the protection of our Constitution, and to ensure that we have fair and free elections in this nation if even these so-called conservative judges are going to kowtow to the radical left.
Well,
yeah.
Not really.
It's very disturbing, in my opinion.
Let me add something real quick, Larry, because
these judges are not really conservative. They were put up to President Trump by the Federalist Society and former White House counsel Don McGahn and people like that. There's special interests that wanted them put on the bench. They are Republican rhinos. They're afraid of their shadow. They've been yes men. That's how they got where they got. And
right.
There's a judge, this isn't a Trump judge, but just a couple of days ago, a judge McConnell in Rhode Island is pushing not to have Federal Society make recommendations. I actually agree with him on that. But he's a Obama appointee. You know how much he paid to get his judgeship? $500,000 in campaign contributions. That's what we've got on the bench.
Yeah, that's really...
Another issue at hand here with these cases is that there really aren't any there isn't any legal precedent established right now in our, I guess you could say, modern day digital world. Okay, and a lot of these judges who have taken these cases are older. Right? Let's just say it like it is. They're older. And so some of these people, they don't really use social media. They don't know how social media works. They aren't familiar with all of the different techniques and technological ways in which these companies are censoring and committing election interference and using algorithms to subvert and interfere with conservative speech online. And this is the same thing we saw during the congressional hearing that I disrupted in 2018 when I confronted Jack Dorsey for committing perjury in Congress. And there was a report that actually came out during the hearing where you had the House Energy Commerce Committee, conducting this hearing. And one of the members of the House Energy Commerce Committee doesn't use a smartphone. He still uses a typewriter. So how can you adequately question Dorsey and Zuckerberg and Sundar Pichai and Sheryl Sandberg about all of these very complex technological forms of communication and forms of censorship and just outright tyranny, right? And it's being implemented on a global scale. How can you effectively question these executives under oath in Congress if you don't even know how to use social media? I would love to know how many members of Congress who were serving on that hearing that day during those congressional hearings on social media bias, how many of them actually post on social media themselves, because a lot of people in Congress, they have aides who do that for them.
Right.
They have people who post for them.
But Laura, they actually may be looking for pornography on social media instead.
What?
That's a joke.
Oh, yeah. So the problem here is that there's such a lack of understanding. And, just to relate it to another case of mine in which I was represented by Ron Coleman. This is a case that Larry isn't representing me in. It's my other lawsuit that was filed against CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and Twitter for tortious interference, right? Because it was later found out that when I was banned from Twitter, that CARE, a terrorist organization, had privately lobbied Twitter to ban me because I exposed Ilhan Omar, who they, of course, had a financial interest in because they endorsed her and heavily sponsored and backed her campaign, okay? The judge said that it was nonsensical, and then he dismissed my lawsuit in Florida because he said it was nonsensical to say that you could have a business relationship with Twitter. Well, if it's nonsensical to say that you can have a business relationship with these social media sites, why do they allow you to have business accounts?
Yeah, advertising and things.
understanding. They wouldn't allow you to have advertising or business accounts if you couldn't have a business relationship. I mean, there's entire businesses in the world that are now digital. I mean, we're seeing it with coronavirus, this switch to virtual communication and a dependency on social media and communication via the internet. So again, it's a lack of understanding. It's a lack of knowledge. I would say that it's also incompetence and really sinister partisan agendas at play.
Here's the thing.
You're raising a very important point. Let me address this, Laura, because you're talking about this nexus of technology and law, and they're both very complex fields. And you're right. The fact that a judge would say, well, how can you have a business relationship with Twitter and kick out the case for that clearly shows that they don't have any understanding of what Twitter is or how it operates. There was something very troubling in this ruling, or whatever we would call it, that came out today. And this should be really disconcerting to people, whether they're on the left or the right, and they should pay more attention to this than trying to make fun of Laura and Larry. They're saying in here that the concept of Twitter violating freedom of speech isn't viable because it's not a government agency. But Larry, isn't it true, if this thing has such broad reach and they allow people like Louis Farrakhan to call Jews termites, but as soon as Laura questions CARE and what they're doing, they say it's Islamophobia and they knock her off. I mean, isn't this an unfair way to suppress Laura's speech while other people are given free speech?
That was so way out, because you see, this is an antitrust case. We fashioned it to get around that issue. Is that when private companies pollute and restrain trade or attempt to monopolize, they're not immune. I mean, they can't do whatever they want under the First Amendment or anything else because they're private. So to write a 4-page opinion that a first-year law student could have written in 2.5 hours at most, they said, well, they're private companies, so we don't even have to analyze anything else. And that's just simply false. And let me explain one other thing here, and this has been abused. There's a Supreme Court case by the name of Bell Atlantic versus Twombly, Twomby. And what that stands for, that was the antitrust case, by the way. The court said that if there's any plausibility to a complaint, the judge has to let it continue on to discovery and possibly, a jury trial if you ask for one. But these judges have turned Twombly on its head, and they've said, we get to decide what's plausible or not. And even if there's a possibility, if we don't consider it plausible, we're going to dismiss it. So that's given them carte blanche. That's giving them a license to, in effect, legally kill cases on their own predilections and desires. And these judges, remember who they are. McFadden's only 41 years old, by the way. Laura and I have a judge in Florida who's just as bad, Judge Roy Altman, who's only 38, okay, wet behind the ears. They decide for themselves, they're arrogant, what they think is plausible or not. And that's the best case scenario. Who knows why they came up with that.
And we filed an ethics complaint against him as well, because these judges are not even allowing for due process and the legal system to play out. They themselves are just making opinions on whether or not cases can proceed. And the fact that they don't understand that you need to go to discovery in order to find out whether or not these companies are colluding. Okay. And that's what the discovery process would reveal. That just shows their total lack of understanding about the current technology and the way that these companies are communicating and working together to suppress conservatives. So they throw these cases out before you're even able to, obtain discovery. And it's just, how are you supposed to proceed legally, right? There's judicial corruption. It is judicial corruption.
Well, it's judicial dishonesty. Let's take the best case scenario here. Let's say, they didn't get some gratuity to make a decision. And it has happened with judges. Alice E. Hastings in the Southern District of Florida. I'm making no accusations here. This particular judge in Florida years ago was impeached for bribes. He was impeached, ran for Congress, and he's been there ever since from South Florida. He's going to be your colleague, Laura, when you win. Okay, you can say hello. So ask him what happened to him. But even if something like that doesn't happen, is that these judges come up the line. They never say anything or do anything that's controversial. They are sucking up to the establishment. They know that if they want to get on the bench, they have to be all things to all people. And they don't want to go against powerful interests that can spend a lot of money to defeat their nomination. And a lot of these judges, lower court judges in the federal district courts, want to go to a higher post in the appellate court, maybe someday the Supreme Court. Kavanaugh's that way. You know, he bought tens of thousands of dollars of tickets to Washington national games and spread them around, you know, to try to get, you know, curry favor with people who might say good things about him, to put him on the Supreme Court. And that's, so they're not the kind of people like Laura and me or you. They're not doers. They're the kind of people you put on Fox News that don't do anything.
Speaking of Fox News, you know, the reason I'm looking at my phone right now is there is a total media blackout. Okay, so not only are we dealing with the censorship of these big tech social media companies that are committing election interference, trying to steal elections for Democrats, and they're silencing American patriots and conservatives who are posting facts while allowing for terrorist organizations and radical leftists to post vile filth and acts of violence online. But then you have the censorship and the media control and the blacklisting at these so-called conservative news organizations like Fox News that bills itself as, you know, a news organization for Republicans. Well, you know, they have their own blacklist at Fox News, and Larry Klayman and I, we have sent out letters to the president of Fox, right? Suzanne Scott. How many emails did we send out, Larry, to all the hosts at Fox News? And you said my client, Laura Loomer, would like to come on to talk about these lawsuits. They ignore. Not only do they ignore, but they also tell their other hosts that we are not allowed to come on because they implement a blacklist. And then it gets worse than that, because while they blacklist us and they prevent us from going on, they then entertain these, you know, bloviations every single night where they talk about how enraged they are about tech censorship while they don't even invite anybody on who's been deplatformed. And then you have this for tonight from Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson saying that, you know, they're authoritarians, that they're willing to censor President Trump. And nobody is pushing back. Really, nobody is pushing back, Tucker? Nobody is pushing back? You know, we are pushing back. There are people who are pushing back, but unfortunately, you know, there are people in the media who are implementing media blacklists to prevent people like myself and others like you and other people who have been deplatformed and censored from going on and talking about their efforts to get justice and their efforts to set a legal precedent with regards to deplatforming and the egregious civil rights violations that are being committed by these tech tyrants. And so I, for one, am not only tired of the hypocrisy and the cancel culture and the deplatforming taking place by this collusion, this very direct collusion between the Democrat Party and the communists in Silicon Valley, but also the complicit and just completely dismissive and passive nature of these so-called Republicans who make millions of dollars every single night pretending like they care about free speech, pretending like they care about censorship, while they turn a blind eye to people who are fighting back. It's unacceptable.
Absolutely.
I mean, we've said this many times, Jason. Turn on Hannity every night. Same people, with a few exceptions, maybe John Solomon, the only one. Nobody ever does anything that goes on. I mean, they're all full of you know what, okay? Because, and it becomes a scandal industry. Let's promise things that aren't going to happen. I was even listening to Rush Limbaugh today, talking about Obama's involvement with Fusion GPS and unmasking and everything else. And you know what Rush's answer was? Same thing as Tom Fitton's answer of my group, which I founded, Judicial Watch. Let's appoint a special counsel. Well, and who did he suggest? Andrew McCarthy from the National Review, that hates Trump's guts, the National Review, you know, rhino Republicans, and an establishment person that will never go the distance. But, and I'm not, you know, complaining. It would never be a Larry Klayman type that would be appointed, because we would actually get the job done. We'd have these people indicted in 24 hours. But even Rush, who spent his whole life in a radio studio, doesn't understand what really goes on in Washington, D.C. And unfortunately, the American people are being duped by these pundits. And I love Rush, and I wish him well, and I hope he recovers. But you know what? He doesn't really know what he's talking about frequently. He spent his whole life in a radio studio.
Yeah, and just going back to Fox News really quickly, you know, the only censored conservative that they like to have on there is Devin Nunes, and he actually hasn't been censored. He's just bringing frivolous civil lawsuits against tons of journalists. I think we might have lost Laura there. She had only a limited amount of time, but there are a couple of other things I wanted to discuss with her. I don't know if she'll be coming back with us, but she might have run out of time. Larry, let me take you back for a second to this Bell Atlantic v. Twombly, because it's my understanding that their notion of plausibility. Do I still have you, Larry?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Their notion of plausibility was they're trying to avoid people suing like Big Bird or space aliens or something like that, right? I mean, even if what you're saying is dubious because you haven't yet explored the facts, if you say this person obstructed my speech or, obstructed my freedom to do free trade, that's plausible. Somebody could do that. That's the type of thing that they have to allow go forward. They're not intended to decide the merits of the arguments, right?
Yeah, that's why we have a jury system. It was King George III who had his yes men on the bench. They didn't have yes women in those days, unfortunately. And they rubber stamped everything that the king wanted, particularly with regard to the colonies, whether it was taxes or confiscation of property or guns, whatever. And the founding fathers, when they crafted the Constitution, were very smart. They said, no, we want to take the power away from the judges because power corrupts, and we want to put it in the hands of the people. And that's why we have the jury system. And there's a presumption that cases should go to juries to settle those issues. And in fact, in Florida, my native state, judges would never do something like this by and large. They would say, okay, amend the complaint, make it a little more precise, and we'll go to discovery. You, defendants, can come back after we take discovery. If there's no case, I'll consider dismissing it. But they're going to give you a chance to develop the facts. We never were able to get into the files of Google and YouTube and Instagram and Apple and Facebook and the rest. And I can assure you that would be a treasure trove of information that would confirm that they were all acting in concert, in effect, an agreement to restrain trade, to squeeze real conservatives out of the internet. Because, look, they'll let the people that you see on Hannity talk. There's no problem with that. They're harmless. They're not going to do anything. They don't do anything. Look at Fitton. He goes on there, and Rush made reference to him today. I happened to be listening quite by accident. I walked into a room where it was on. Tom Fitton says we should appoint a special counsel, that maybe it should be Sidney Powell. Okay?
Oh.
So Fitton, they get documents over there, but they don't do what I used to do when I ran Judicial Watch, and they don't do what I do now. They don't use the documents in hard-hitting cases or citizens' grand juries. They say, oh, the government, why don't you take care of it? You know what? The government's not going to take care of anything in today's day and age. You know that.
Yeah.
And Rush should know that. And I'm disappointed, that he's swallowing the Kool-Aid himself. The poor guy, is on his deathbed and has cancer, and I pray for him that he gets well. And I think he's done a lot of really good things for the conservative movement, but he does not understand, or does not want to understand, that no special counsel is going to do anything. And besides, there's no stomach for it anymore, not after the Russian collusion investigation and the Ukrainian collusion investigation and then impeachment. That's not going to happen. So don't sell the American people a bill of goods that isn't going to happen. And don't pass it off to the government to do the job that we, the people, must do ourselves. And that's what Laura has been doing, and that's what I've been trying to do. Now, if you're not going to risk losing, you'll never win. Okay, so if you want to play it safe like Fitton at Judicial Watch and just get documents and go on TV and say, look at the great documents I have, okay, you can raise a lot of money doing that because they'll put you on the networks. But if you're going to stick your neck out like Laura has, like Justice Roy Moore, like Sheriff Arpaio, like Jerry Corsi and others, and then it doesn't work out because you've got some judge that's very political and protecting his own flanks. For people that would criticize that, shame on them. Shame on them, because what are you doing? Sitting on a couch, eating popcorn, drinking beer, and being entertained by Hannity? Is that helping this country at all? No, not. So basically, I'm lecturing my children right now. And you won't hear me crowing, every day. Major Judicial Watch victory. Major Judicial Watch victory. I got documents, okay? I'll tell you something. Major Klayman lost, Major Loomer lost, okay? And that's a fact. Now, we're going to try to reverse it, but if we don't reverse it that way, we'll do it another way that's peaceful and legal. But we're not giving up, and the American people will rise up in the appropriate way and set this country straight. Because right now, this country is in a terrible state. I had a little off-color joke that I made earlier. I said, they wouldn't give us oral argument, the court. Instead, we got screwed. Okay, so this is something. Yeah, this is something that I said they won't give us oral. Instead, we got screwed. You know, it's a play on words.
Exactly.
You know? Exactly. So, you know, and I don't hate judges. I think they're our most important public servants, but they're not acting that way. They were put there to protect us. And President Trump should also be candid with the American people and look around and take advice from Freedom Watch or true conservatives and who to point to the bench, because his judges, by and large, I've been in front of seven of them so far. They're absolutely terrible. They're afraid of their shadow. They're like Puxatawny Phil. They'll crawl back into their chambers, which is like their hole, and they don't want to deal with anything that's controversial.
Well, I think we're learning a lot of details, Larry, about how the Washington swamp can work against someone who might have a lot of experience in the way that Donald Trump does, but no experience there. I mean, you're an expert lawyer, but of course, if I had you on set to do a movie production your first day there, you'd have no idea what's going on. It would be very easy for other members of the crew to do things to make you look foolish. So when Donald Trump comes to Washington and all these people who come to him pretending to help him turn out later to be double-crossing him, this seems to be something that all of us are getting a lesson in. And we've been having some issues with big tech just right here on this broadcast. Laura was cut off. We've been texting. I'm trying to add her back, but we're not able to do that. And your video feed was super constrained there for a while. You're back to normal quality, but I know you've had a very long day, Larry, and you've got to kind of go back to the drawing board with this Freedom Watch v. Google et al. Case. But was there anything else we wanted to cover tonight? This is not the end of the line for this.
No, it's not the end of the line. I have creative ways. I may try to file this case in state court down in Florida, where I'm a citizen, where Laura's a citizen. We'll find a way around it, and we will find a good judge. They're few and far between, but we will find a good judge. And there are some good ones out there, not so much on the federal bench, but on the state bench, and because they're accountable to the people. And I just ended with this thought. Go back and read Thomas Jefferson. He was sent a copy of the Constitution when he was our foreign minister in Paris after the Revolution. He loved the French. He was actually an architect of the French Revolution, one of them.
Wow.
And he sent it back, and he said, you know, I cannot agree to this provision on federal judges. First of all, we don't need federal judges. Number two, to the extent that, you know, you're thinking that they're there for life, and the Constitution doesn't even say that. It just says they serve for good behavior. They will turn into despots because they're not accountable to the people. And he was talking not just about making decisions with regard to the Constitution, but just generally. And that's when he said, and I say it again, and I'm not advocating, but he advocated it. And remember, the French Revolution was very bloody. And he said, you know, there will come a point in time when we will have a revolution, perhaps every other generation, and we will again have to spill the blood of patriots. And what is a little bit of blood to preserve liberty and freedom? He said that, and I'm paraphrasing to some extent. And I don't want to see it come to that. But if you don't have federal judges that will protect the American people from the other two branches of government, from tyranny from the other two branches of government, and in fact become even more tyrannical than the other two, then what's the option? And that's what Jefferson was saying. So I'm trying to prevent that. Laura's trying to prevent it. We don't want to see it happen. But if things don't change, this country's going to explode. And now we're in a pandemic of the coronavirus. People are extremely upset at the dictatorial power of state governors, imprisoning them in home, suggestions that they're going to force them to take vaccinations that could be deadly for them, or at least very harmful. Yeah. We see a breakdown of constitutional and civil rights like we've never seen before, and people are frightened and they're scared, and they've already started to take to the streets. Now, fortunately, not in a terribly violent way, but it could turn that way. And if you don't have judges that are going to step in, then we're in big trouble. Just a few days ago, Jason, some hack federal judge appointed by Obama refused to enjoin the state governor from, calling off, or at least threatening that people be arrested if they met in church to pray. Okay, now, the left doesn't have a high regard for God, generally. Okay, so that's where that comes from. But
Larry, They really are pushing people to the edge. As we speak right now, there are riots and protests going on in Minneapolis where police stood on the neck. A white police officer put his knee on the throat of George Floyd. A white officer killed this black guy. He was smiling, the white officer, while he literally choked the guy out. He lost control of his bladder. There were so many signs that this George Floyd was subdued, but yet the police did not relent until he was dead. And now all they've done is fire the police officers. I agree with these protesters in Minnesota. It's not enough to fire these officers. They need to be put in jail and charged with murder immediately. We had an incident about a month ago in New York City. I called the Internal Affairs Bureau last week, and they told me there was an ongoing investigation. I mean, I think if I got out in the street or you got out in the street and punched somebody, slapped them, boxed their ears, slammed them into the street, the police would take you away right away and you'd be in trial the next day.
I agree with you, Jason, and I'm not giving anything in a relative context, but the great majority of police are trying to do their jobs. They're not respected. That does not justify what apparently happened here at all. But, you know, we have a situation, another hack judge in Dallas dismissed the case against Louis Farrakhan a while back. It was brought by the father of a policeman, Patrick Zamarripa, that was killed, Latino policeman, in that Dallas massacre a number of years ago by a disciple of Louis Farrakhan. She did the same thing. Our allegations weren't plausible that Farrakhan was behind it. Just hours before the assassinations of these police officers, Farrakhan was calling for their death. So,
wow.
You know,
probably on Twitter, right?
Cuts both ways. And he does that continuously, and he walks off scot-free because he's a minority, untouchable. They're scared if you do anything, we'll be called a racist, or maybe they might even try to harm me if I'm a judge. They don't have any guts, and they're not there to protect the American people. They're there for themselves. And most people are there for themselves, but our founding fathers were not there for themselves, and they risked their lives and pledged their fortunes and their sacred honor to form a new nation. And the least we can do is to get judges who will enforce the rule of law. And I'm sorry to say President Trump has not done that. He's been duped by these lukewarm so-called conservatives like the Federalist Society and other special interests in Washington, D.C. His judges are almost as bad as the Clinton and Obama judge. I haven't found one good one yet. Maybe I will. I'm holding out hope.
You know, Larry, we've had more computer crashes during this interview than in all three of the past shows, but I can no longer, without jumping through a series of hoops here, can't show people freedomwatchusa.org. I can encourage them to visit freedomwatchusa.org and financially sponsor Larry and his team there at Freedom Watch. These are lawsuits that need to be brought. And we see the type of things that judges can do just with the stroke of the pen that cause Larry and Laura and citizens like us to have to go back to the well and bring these things up again and again. It's amazing how easily they can stymie us. I mean, this is lawfare, Larry. They're basically doing things that they can do that they shouldn't do. This is not justice.
You know, I have one message to say, Jason, and I've got to run too. It's been a long day. But if you are afraid to lose, you will never win. And I learned that once. I was playing for the club championship. You know, I watch the Golf Channel now because I can't stand watching Fox News.
I see it right there.
At least in golf, you know, you hit a good shot, you get rewarded. You hit a bad shot, it's your fault. It's not some crazy judge coming in and messing everything up. But I remember missing a 2.5-foot putt to lose the club championship when I was a kid, when I was 18 years old. And I was so afraid of losing that I couldn't make the putt. And if you just keep your eye on the ball, so to speak, and do your job and not worry about losing, because if you worry about it, you'll never win. And that was a lesson that I learned. And I don't care how many times I have to go into court and deal with judges like this. I'm never going to give up. We're going to find some good judges. We're going to get the job done. We have our citizens' grand juries that will hold people accountable. You were there. You saw how we indicted Mueller. We're going to try him once the coronavirus subsides to some degree and we can have people convene. We're going to hold the Clintons accountable. We're going to hold the Obamas accountable. And I say to Rush Limbaugh, who's also ignored our case, not just Fox News. It's pathetic when you have to quote Tom Fitton pleading with the government to take action, because the government ain't going to take action for you. The government is our problem. As Ronald Reagan said, it's not the solution.
Yeah. Well, Larry, thanks for taking time out of your day, and I apologize to Laura. I don't know what caused that technical problem, but we were not able to reconnect with her. We'll continue following up with this story as more things develop. I do want to remind people to visit freedomwatchusa.org and help Larry carry on this fight, and help me by becoming a sponsor of Crowdsource the Truth so we can keep this information coming to you. Fox News doesn't want to have Laura on, doesn't want to have Larry on. They got a whole story they want to tell you about Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, Devin Nunes, Sean Hannity. All these people have everything going on over there, but this is information that we're bringing to you, the viewers. So please join us there on Patreon and Subscribestar. Larry, we'll have you back real soon. Thanks for taking time out of the day, and have a great night.
Bless Jason.
Thanks for watching, everybody.